Well, hello folks, and welcome to episode 230 of Retropower Uncut. And we're going to start off with some E-Type today. Well, actually, we're going to quickly mention the lack of BMW E46 there. We've got a gap. That's because I am going to be trying to get working on the Reliance Scimitar very imminently. I was hoping to today. In reality, I think that's going to become tomorrow, but more of that next week. E-Type. Matthew has been working in the rear seat area of this car because we wanted to add basically we've got to trim that area. There's no seats going there. It is just a trimmed area in the standard vehicle, and there is a sort of a carpeted box thing that sits in there which doesn't look all that nice. We wanted to change that, and we wanted to add various other changes to that area, and we wanted to add some slightly more modern seat belts into the mix, and a bit of a sound system is going in there. There's an amplifier and an audio receiver, I believe, going in there, and there's some speakers got to go in and various other things. So there's an area of fabrication involved there. Carl and I sort of came up with a bit of a plan of how we wanted the front of that area to look and did a bit of a sketch. From that, Matt has fabricated the forward bulkhead, if you like, to that little stowage area, that closed-in area, which would be where a rear seat would go if you had room, if you had people with no legs to go in there. So Matt's done a beautiful job of fabricating the front of that, and then has set a line around within the car using a laser set level to the top of the sills, because the car's not sitting level, but he set that level to the top of the sills to get the level, and then offset a line all the way around that area, and then welded in a return flange all the way around for a bulkhead to sit on. And he's then made a template for that bulkhead, which is, before I knock everything off, made a cardboard template initially to get it roughed out, and then made that in some 5mm thick plywood, which is now the better template, and then that will be transferred in turn probably to another piece of wood, but probably to some birch or hardwood ply, probably some birch plywood, which will go in that rear area and form the actual final lid that goes in there that will be screwed in. Then he has now revised the metalwork in the reinforcer gussets that kind of tie the back of the inner sill into the rear wheel arch. He's cut into those, and then we fabricated some quite heavy duty boxes into those out of 2mm thick steel sheet with 3mm thick reinforcing plates in to carry a seatbelt anchorage to carry the rear inertia reel units. These cars had a mishmash of seatbelt arrangements. In a very short period of time, they had non-inertia reel belts, lap belts, inertia reel shoulder belts, all of them fitted in fairly hodgepodge fashions, but they do have the lower seatbelt mounting points in. The upper seatbelt mounting points are varying degrees of unsatisfactoriness, if that's a word, which it isn't. So we are revising that slightly, and we are putting the inertia reels into that floor area, and then we're reinforcing the B pillar and adding a shoulder point there, because there needs to be a guide point there regardless, and the inertia reel fitment points were a bit of a hodgepodge, and they were, as I say, we've revised that, and we're fitting an upper shoulder point into the B pillar, adding some reinforcement in there. We've got to be careful because the hard top also has a mounting point that goes in there, so we're fitting that just below where the hard top roof mounting point is, and we're having to avoid all of the soft top moving mechanism as well. So it's quite fiddly, but we think we've got a place where we can put that shoulder strap mounting point that we can reinforce to be of adequate strength, and that we can fit the inertia reels in a suitable place as well. As I say, it's all a little bit of a fiddle. I had to refresh my memory on pull test strength requirements for seatbelt anchorages. I've always had a number, I was saying to the guys upstairs, I've always had a number of 1.5 tons in my head, and whenever I've worked with these things, bear in mind this is largely fly-by brain cell design, not calculated generally on these things, because we're working with pre-existing structures, so they're very hard to calculate out properly. But I've always worked with 1.5 tons as a rule of thumb in my head, and I thought I better just be more than a rule of thumb on this, and better go and just check. So I've just checked the EU type approval regulations, and I was actually slightly over. It's like 1,300 and something kilos pull test. It's an impact pull, so it's a sudden pull. But yeah, basically it's 1,300 kilos pull, or 1,330 something pull on the points. The inertia reel mounts will be way higher than that. I would say they'll withstand a pull probably upwards of 3 tons. The shoulder points the B-pillars as they are would definitely not withstand a 1300 or 1500 kilo pull. So we're adding a reinforcer in at the bottom of that B-pillar, and we're adding some reinforcement at the top of the B-pillar, which I think would then enable it to take that sort of pull test. Bear in mind, this is all a bit of a moot point in that the original E-Type is no way designed to those requirements. The original body is no way designed to any real crash test standards at all. And, you know, you've got the roll protection afforded by the two hockey sticks at the front, and you know the car is certainly not built to modern safety standards. But as I said to the guys yesterday, one of my thoughts is I don't want parts I'm adding to the car to be below par in terms of those safety standards. So it's a little bit of a, there's nothing to say what standard I have to do those points to, but my conscience says I ought to make them be approximately what a modern type approval standard is. At least then I've done my bit. I may be limited by the vehicle around it, but at least I've done my bit. So that's enough on that. Matt's doing some very nice fabrication there, and you'll see that develop as he adds the various further parts. Moving on from that, we come back to the Saab. Bobby is back. Now, Bobby's actually only just moved on to the Saab today because he's been finalising the aircon lines that we talked about in previous episodes, and there's been some complications on those of varying sorts, not to do with his machine, but to do with the termination of the ends of those lines where we have to braze to them. We're on a learning curve, and Bobby's been doing a bit of research, and we've discovered that we're using a 6000 series aluminium for those lines, which is a readily available pipe size, or readily available fabrication tube size, and I've generally used that for welded aluminium fabrications in the past. What we're discovering is it's a bit of a pain to braze. We're using a zinc-based solder, which is designed for or brazing rod, which is designed for the refrigeration industry. Johnson Matthey makes some of the, and various other companies make them. Bobby's actually picked up off his own back while he was having his teeth mended in Bulgaria. He'd done a bit of research and bought various rods, various zinc alloy rods for aluminium brazing that were designed for the refrigeration industry to trial, because one of the issues apparently with the 6000 series aluminium is that magnesium comes out of solution and causes issues with the braze, and this is one of the problems we've had, is very, very, very tiny porosity and basically failing pressure test on outwardly perfectly good brazed joints, and he's had issues getting a repeatable good quality brazed joint on the ends of those lines. And tiny, we're talking sort of barely visible tiny bubbles forming at 100 psi pressure. Very, very, very hard to find and very hard to get rid of. So we've been fighting a battle on that. He's fought the battle and won, but it's not a repeatable process yet. So that's something we still need to develop. So we're going to look at getting some, if anybody can point me in the direction of a good supplier of reasonable quantities, not just like meter lengths, but reasonable quantities of 1000 series aluminium lines, preferably with an 18 gauge wall thickness, because the other problem we've got is we can only get the 6000 series tubing in 16 gauge or 1.5 or 1.6 millimeter wall thickness. We could do with it being 1.2 millimeter wall thickness. So if anybody knows of anybody that stock holds decent, like 6 meter lengths of 1.2 millimeter wall, 1000 series aluminium tubing in 5/8 OD, ½ inch OD and 3/8 inch OD, that would be really useful. Because we could do with some. So that would be useful, thank you. Leaning on our hive mind of viewers. Moving on from that, Bobby is just starting on the repair work on the Saab body. So he's got the scuttle to repair, which he's just been making the sections for, as I can see here, and he's starting to work on the other end, getting the bits made for that, and then he can get all that welded in so that he can get the body repaired, and then we can get the body fitted back onto the floor pan, then move on to the next stages. Once that's fabricated on, move on to the next stages, which in broad and loose terms, we'll obviously be finishing the pillar fabrication and the structural stuff that Bobby was working on anyway, and then determining where we're going to be flanging carbon fibre to steel around the quarter panels, removing the quarter panels, and then getting the CAD guys on with doing some more scan work so that we can basically sew in CAD the body surfaces to the mounting flanges for the rear half of the car. And that'll be an exciting point to be at. So that's what's going on with Saab. E9. I think I mentioned last week getting the rear suspension components from Tim Pollock, which is good. We have those mounted, been a couple of little to's and fro's and discoveries along the way, which I'm sure BMW gurus watching will say, ah yes, you will discover this. We've discovered that the mounting height for the 5 Series, E28 5 Series rear beam of subframe, if you like, that we're using is slightly different to the E9, so we need to put a spacer above the mounting bushes for that, which is not a problem. However, it means that those mounting bushes are too long for the standard E9 rear subframe mounting pins, and I proposed that a good answer to that was to use an E30 rear subframe mounting pin, which is also common to many, many other BMWs, both large and small. It's used in various 7 Series. I think it might even be used in the 8s. It's used in various things. However, there's a slight difference in the spline diameter where the splines that press into the body fit. Now we can get around that, but we need to check everything else works. We may have to make some little adapters and weld them in for the spline ends where they attach into the body, unless, again, leaning on hive mind of our viewers, any keen BMW specialists in our viewership know of a BMW beam mounting pin that presses into the body that has the same dimensions in the body as the E9, E28 type pin, but that has the length of the E30 type pin. I don't know if there is or not. If not, we can either make one or probably make a little adapter to adapt the E30 one to the E9 body. Not the end of the world either way, but it'd be interesting if there is an off-the-shelf part from BMW. I couldn't see one. It seemed to be one pin or the other, and there didn't seem to be a third variant as far as I could see for that type of fitment, but you never know. But anyway, that doesn't really stop us doing anything. Stu's got that rear beam mounted, got it set to the height where it will need to be in advance of us making those spacer pucks that have got to go in. Got everything set up and got the swinging arm on this side set at ride height. He's just chucked one of the wheels off the E46 BMW on, got that set at ride height so that we can determine at ride height the exact wheelbase from the centre of the rear wheel to the centre of the front wheel. And then earlier in the week, and gone round and round and lost some more of my hair that I haven't got very much of. Stu hasn't got any left anyway, so he can't pull his out. We've worked out the exact positioning of the front axle centre line mathematically from using the BMW, the dimensions from the E46 to the structural points on that to get us the axle centre line, because none of the jig drawings I can find and none of the information anywhere that I can find online gives me the actual axle centre lines for the E46. I can get any body repair dimension I want, but none of them tell me where the middle of the wheel should be, which is a pretty fundamental problem, and I would have thought that should be on that information, but none of the jig drawings I can find have that information. But anyway, we've established that. Stu's marked it on the chassis, worked out where the subframe mountings have got to go to get the axle centre line in the right place, and then we can transfer that to work out exactly where the strut tops have got to go so we can start fabricating those. All of that is great. Whilst waiting for parts to do some of those things, Stu's also then moved on to repairing the rear inner scuttle panel, the panel at the bottom of the rear windscreen, which we're replacing, but the underneath panel we can't buy. And it just so happens to be the world's most complicated shape. I think it's probably, and I'm going to kick myself for saying this, I think it's possibly the trickiest shaped piece of metal on the entire car that we're going to have to make. Fortunately, it is only a reinforcer panel. It goes inside, you can't see it, so the exact accuracy of it isn't that important. All that said, Stu has done a very nice job of copying the shape of the original part, but it does look like somebody wanted to make some origami the day they designed that particular bit of metal, considering it is just a drain channel and reinforcer piece. But Stu's done a lovely job of making that piece. I don't know if he's actually welded it in yet or not. Looking at the car, by the staining I can see from here, I think he probably has welded it in. But yeah, he's got that piece done, certainly ready to weld in if it isn't actually welded in. And we are still waiting for panels because UPS, who are delivering those panels, appear to be their parcel delivery centre appears to have a floor set of 2 feet of treacle, and they don't actually seem to be able to move anything on and get it to us. It's sat at UPS, has been sat at UPS for around a week, and trying to get motion out of that parcel appears to be very difficult. So hopefully we will have some panels very soon. If UPS come along, please deliver the parts. They're all paid for, customs charges are paid, everything's dealt with. For some reason, it seems to be impossible to get them here. Hopefully they'll be here soon. And that's where we're at on the E9. The Aston, there is nothing to report this week because of CAD things and because of me needing to do things which I have not had time to do. I basically need to review drawings. Cal and I need to review drawings. However, we're doing some very exciting things related to Global Workshop at the moment as well, which I don't know if Cal's going to talk through with you. If he doesn't, we will be doing at some point soon. But yes, there's lots of planning of things at a sort of overall level going on. And that's been absorbing quite a lot of our time, so we've been a bit limited on time to review drawings and do things like that. The other job that I've been doing, which is again not related to that and not related to things here, is doing a few jobs for the den to get caught up with some fabrication work there. As you're aware, the cut-off line we have on work at the den is that we do not do fabrication work on site at the den. That is the line we cut off. It's a very simple line, and so we will not take on welding, rust repair, that type of work at that site. That's an agreement, but that means that some of the jobs, like engine conversion type work, which may require some bits of fabrication doing, mean that fabrication has to come up here. And one of those jobs was a piece I'm making, which Mark will probably talk about in a minute because he's about to be painting it. But the MGB that you've seen down at the den with the V8 in, that's had a gearbox conversion, and for that gearbox it needs a new gearbox cross member making. We were looking at reusing the old one, but the reality is it really just wants a new one making. By the time we've chopped the old one around enough to make it fit, there's hardly any of it left. So I've just made a new one. I've just fabricated that this morning. As I say, Mark's about to paint it, so that's a really good time to hand over to Mark and let him take you through the body shop stuff. So over to Mark.
Yeah, that's about right.
Oh, hi guys. Didn't see you there. Just stroking my pipe. Cleaning this up. You've probably seen Bobby making these previously. So welcome back to the body shop. You all right, Gaz, now? Just having a little talk with Gaz. Not doing anything. Oh, you thought we were doing something else, didn't you? Prep. Oh, dirty minds out there. All right, so this week, just been prepping stuff like this. Aircon pipes, there's 2 more in the booth. Ready to black direct, matte that is. We've got this for the den. I think it's for the MG. Is there a V8 MG or something down there? So I'm just prepping that, directing that. Also, me and Gaz have been on with the Jaguar. So this is the final bits now. We're just doing all the detailed stuff. This is 320, we block this, 400. That's ready now. Like, we've just got to go around, check everything, check for stopper, like some little pinholes, just make sure. Check it over. I think all the panels are ready apart from the back panels and the wings. And yeah, then it's like sealer time in the booth and then paint. So on that note, I can't say anything else more, so see you next time.
So thank you very much for that, Mark, and I'm going to, with no further ado, hand you straight over to Cal and let him take you through the assembly shop and see what's cracking on in there. I'll see you in a week's time.
Thank you very much, Nat. I'm actually going to start with something I should do more often, which is plugging our social media channels. Now, we've had a Facebook page, if you remember what Facebook is, since I reckon like the second year we were going, 2010. And Jamie, the man behind the camera, is extremely good at writing interesting written articles, and there are a lot of those on there. And I was thinking the one he's just put on there was a really good article in terms of sparking debate, and it was essentially speaking to various members of staff here and asking us what our favourite car builds over the years have been, not Retropower, but done by other people. I think my 3 that I listed were Boyd Coddington's Cadzilla, just because it was so ahead of its time. It still looks an incredible hot rod now, and when you think about it, it was done I think in the early 90s. It's just ridiculous how good it still looks. I mean, car manufacturers can only dream of having a car that's so timeless. And then moving on a little bit, there was a Model A Ford built by a company in I think Finland called Makala Auto Tuning. I think it was built for Juha Kankinen, and it's absolutely incredible. It's like totally done to look like a Model A, but it's essentially like Group 4 running gear, a BDA in it, but made in incredible detail to look like an old sort of flathead 4-cylinder. It's got this amazing fabricated airbox. The plug lead tubes have kind of got a fake spark plug on the top, so it looks like it's got old school spark plugs sticking out the top with the wires kind of screwed on. Dry sump tanks in like the leather luggage rack on the back. It's just an incredible thing. So I'll put a link to that in the description. And then probably more recently, Roadster Shop's Grand National build. Seems to have been a spate of Grand Nationals built in the States. Now, more recently, Ring Brothers did an absolutely awesome one, and the Dutch boys did as well. But Roadster Shop kind of led that little trend, and particularly the interior on it is just a masterpiece. It still looks, it's one of them where at a glance you're just like, yeah, it's a standard interior, and then the more you look, the more detail you see, and the lengths they went to with things like the displays and the graphic design on them, and it's just an absolutely stunning build, and one that's really understated in a way. So yeah, they were my 3. It'd be interesting to hear if you want to put in the comments car builds by other people that have really inspired you. We'd be interested to hear. But yeah, check out our Facebook page, also our Instagram, Retropower Cars. There's lots of stuff posted on there. Right, Interceptor. So we're just cracking on with assembly work on this. So we've got the bonnet latch assemblies now in. We've zinc plated the actual latch mechanism, and then there's like a link tube that goes between the two, which has been Xylan coated. We're looking at some of the air ducting fitment now, so parts that we made during dry build. So this is the plenum that goes on the inside of the bulkhead. There's a 3D printed adapter that adapts to the central 2 vents, which are fresh air straight from the scuttle, and then there's more 3D prints that adapt the outer 2 vents, because these are going to have the Bentley organ stop vents in them, that adapt them to the HVAC unit. So starting to get stuff like that in place. That'll allow us to get the scuttle vent in, and then we can get the duct that we've got. There's a fabricated duct that sits under here. We can bolt that in. The wiper mechanism's all in now as well. So yeah, it's just starting the build-up bit. It's kind of the fun part when you're bolting shiny bits onto a shiny shell. So that's Interceptor. Moving along to leg rows, Alex and Steve have been absolutely flat out on the wiring. Steve's been making up the main chassis loom for the second car, the rear loom for the second car, and in the meantime Alex has been doing he's buttoned up the design work for the engine harness. He's then been doing the rope loom, so that's when he lays out essentially a wiring loom mocked up in rope to get the routing, so he can then measure up for the lengths. He's now done that, so he's now transferring that over so we can start making the engine harnesses for these. And then Bobby, now he's back. Thank you for, people will have noticed that Bobby was missing the last couple of weeks. Don't worry, he's just on holiday. He has been doing the air conditioning hardline fabrication using the crimp tool of his own design, and it's strangely therapeutic. Well, thank you, Bobby, for your therapeutic hardline fabrication. What other channel gives you such a thing? Right, Project Kuma, we're just in the spanner checking stage. So we got the engine and box back in, ran that up. I think we've ran it up, dropped the coolant out, ran it up to try and get any remaining oil residue out of there. Oil cooler we tested outside of the radiator because it's got a water to oil heat exchanger in it, and that didn't show any leaks. So we can only come to the conclusion that there was somehow oil contamination in the coolant, and we don't know why. But everything does seem okay now on that. So we've run it up to temperature again. We're just going through doing the final spanner check. So when we're in the very latter stages before road testing, we have a check sheet, and any safety critical fasteners are checked by 2 independent individuals, ticked off. They have a sort of colour coordinated paint marking system on the bolts, which can then be referred to later to see if there's any movement, but also they show that those bolts have been checked. And everything's photographed as well with those paint marks on, so we're just going through that process on that now with a view to road testing. So very, very close on that. And then Project Churchill, we've just had the prop shaft back from being made, so driveline is basically complete. I can't spin the wheels anymore, they are attached to the transmission for the first time. And Zerkatech are just about to do the ceramic coating of the exhaust manifolds for this, which will then allow the whole exhaust system to go in, at which point mechanically we are getting pretty close. We need to have the coilovers made still, and obviously the final wheels, but yeah, it's good progress on that. Moving on from that, I've been thinking about CAD Den. So George has largely been on with the Aston DBS chassis and going through all of the final tweaks and changes. So if fair credit to him, he has designed an entire chassis and all of the suspension, drivetrain and all the related parts. So it's quite a big task. So it's easy to miss things. At this point in proceedings, Nat and I basically go over the drawing, look at the model, try and brainstorm any things he might have missed because there's so much to think about. So I've kind of done a review of that chassis already. He's gone back and done a load of changes on it. Nat will now do a review as well from his point of view. So we bring 2 different points of view to it. Mine will be more of a mechanical assembly mindset and his will be more of an engineering mindset. So he'll be looking at things like material thicknesses, load paths, that sort of thing. And I'll be looking at it from a can we physically put it together point of view, largely. So following my review, there were a few changes, a couple of things that spring to mind. We realised on the front wishbone, I think it was the lower wishbones, you wouldn't actually be able to fit the bolts. They're in the model fitted, but one of them at least didn't have a path to actually get it out because there was another reinforcer plate behind it. So I made some revisions there. The diff, it basically goes up from underneath. There's 2 bolts in from the front, 1 in from the back. But I was concerned that the chassis was dead flush against the mounts, and any sort of powder coat buildup or any discrepancies in the exact dimensions of the chassis would potentially make it incredibly difficult to slide that diff up into place, certainly without damaging paint. So what we decided to do was kick out the chassis section behind it and give it a few mil clearance, and then we'll have a shim in there. So essentially you put the diff up into place, put the front bolts in, and then put the shim in and the final bolt at the back, and it means that if it's fractionally tighter due to any slight discrepancies during fabrication, it means that we can just resize that shim. So that was a good move. And then we've also decided to do a change on the rear suspension arm mountings such that we can use either C6 or C7 rear end parts. Now generally this has been based around Corvette C7, but we did realise that on the rear upright, the upper ball joint on the C7 is incredibly close / probably slightly touching a 17-inch wheel, which is what we're hoping to use. This client's hoping to avoid the sort of hot rod look and keep it fairly classic looking. And having done a few renders, I don't think if you go over 17-inch it does that. I think it starts to look too hot rod. Now it's an option potentially to go to 18 on the back, but we'd rather go with 17s. Now for 17s we need to use Corvette C6 parts, which are very interchangeable, but one of the location arms mounts in a different way. But we had a look at it and realised that actually if we made a few changes, we could make it such that we could interchange the parts and fit either C6 or C7. So that's what we've done, which means our intention is to build it with C6. We've got all the C6 uprights and arms, but it does leave the possibility of upgrading to 18-inch wheels and using C7 parts if, for instance, further down the line, we decide to supercharge the engine and give it a lot more power. We want bigger brakes, we want stronger parts, we could swap to C7 rear end on it. But certainly we have no concerns about using the C6 stuff with the specification as it stands. So that was another change. So Nat will be reviewing that next. And then we're going to be sending a lot of parts for laser cutting and starting to build an enormous Airfix model. Luke, he's been on with a couple of things. We've just been revisiting the front end of the E-Type. We've been chopping and changing ideas or throwing ideas around regarding the air intake at the front. On a Series 3 originally, there's quite an ugly, boxy scoop under the front, and we want to maximise the amount of air going through the radiator, so we don't want to compromise that air intake. And we also need some air intake at the side, sort of outboard of the radiator, to feed the engine air. Now originally it's kind of stolen from the radiator air, it's stolen from the air that goes through the main grill aperture, but what we want is some separate intakes, so all the air that's going through the main aperture and all the air through whatever scoop we come up with is through the radiator, and there are additional intakes for the engine air. So we've been kind of throwing ideas around for a while on this and never really coming up with something we were happy with cosmetically and functionally. And then a thought occurred to potentially do some knacker ducts underneath, because we've always been looking at a scoop that comes down. And that actually works visually very well. You can't see them at all from a normal viewing angle, but you can fit some fairly sizable ducts under there, which would feed as much air to the radiator as the original scoop would do. And then we've got the option to put some more outboard to feed the engine air. So that's looking pretty good. However, in the process of various iterations of rendering we've done, the client was quite keen on having a bit of a chin spoiler on there, just to set it apart, you know, give it a bit more of a USP, if you like. And we did do a rendering of a chin spoiler that looked pretty smart, that he was pretty happy with. So we're now trying a combination of the both, where we get a chin spoiler in there, but with cutouts in it that allow the air to pass through to the knacker duct. So we're still playing with that, but that's some of the things that Luke had been on with at the minute. And then he's been on also with the centre console revisions for the MGB that's down at the den. So we'll go down there in a minute, but they've now got the Tremec gearbox conversion done on that. So we can now go into the final stages of that centre console design, because we now know exactly where the shifter position is going to be, which was actually a little bit more different to what we expected. It was a good bit further forward. So he's made some revisions to that. I'm going to pass them on to the customer, see if they're happy, and then we'll be able to start looking at manufacturing that console, which will kind of button up the interior on that. So let's head down the den and have a look. Here we are back at the den, and the sun is out. I think summer is on the horizon, which is rather nice. So we're going to start with the MGB, because that's what I was just talking about. Now the Tremec box is in. Luke's been back down to scan the tunnel, get the exact shifter position, so he can then complete the edits to his centre console, so we can get that made. Also, the customer with this has decided he wants a custom gear stick making as well. Basically because there isn't an off-the-shelf stick that comes with the Tremec box. There's various ones available, but he wants a real classics, sort of old school looking stick, and then he's got a knob that's got sentimental value. That sounds a bit wrong, but he does. So we're making a stick to suit that knob. And then Nat's just been down measuring up for the gearbox cross member, so we can make up the gearbox cross member, and then we can get all of the mechanical bits back in, and everything will be tickety-boo, and then it'll be back over almost at that point to Richard to start getting some interior into it. Moving this way, it's difficult to know which way to turn in here at the minute. It is kind of like a dream car workshop, certainly for me, and I'm guessing many people of my generation. So E30 M3, that is awaiting some parts, but the inspection on that was more or less as we expected. That the thing is absolutely pristine, but there were just a few little things. I think there was like a perished exhaust hanger on it. The belts could do with replacing. I mean, then it's not mega urgent, but that was one thing that the client mentioned he'd like doing. There was a little bit of wear on the dizzy cap and rotor arm, so we're going to do those as well. So we're just waiting for some BMW parts. And then also there's a sort of gripe amongst E30 owners who are at the fussier end of the scale, myself included in that description, that the stereo originally kind of sits just mounted flush, and it doesn't look like a very integrated part of the fascia. And there is already an existing, I think it's a 3D printed version of that part of the centre console you can get that allows the stereo to sit in a bit more recessed. So I think the customer's got one of those on order, which we're going to fit. But yeah, it's a relatively small job list on that. And then next to it is this Mitsubishi Evo wagon, which is Nick's own car, which he's bought, I believe, to do some work on, possibly sell at that point, although I can guarantee by the time he's done all the work on it, he's going to actually want to keep it. But what he thinks is that he's going to make a profit on this, or at least that's what he's told his wife. What's actually going to happen is he's going to find a string of problems on it, because it's quite obviously not been used that much, and he's going to pile more and more money into it, and then eventually make a huge loss. So, but incredibly cool car. I did a little teaser on the rear of this the other day, and with a guess what car it is, just a little vent that sits next to the rear light. But I love the look of these. I think I actually prefer the look of the wagon to the saloon, and they're just not a common sight. So it is very cool to have that in the workshop. It's a car that there was another one doing the rounds around here. I used to see it on the road every now and then, and every time I saw it, I was like, oh, I really want one of those. So that's that. Mark III Golf. A few bits going on with this. So customers decided wants to tidy up the engine bay a little bit. The aluminium cam cover it's just a little bit scabby looking basically, so we're taking that away. We're going to bead blast that at Retropower, clear Cerakote it, which should make that look brand new. It's a really good tip actually, that there's a Cerakote product which is specifically designed to go over bare aluminium castings and completely preserve their look, so they still look like a bare aluminium casting, but you don't get that sort of surface furring with moisture that you get over time, that for instance the engine bay of Nick's Lancer has. Audio system going in, so I think we've got focal 6.5 inch components in the front with the tweeters going into the original locations in the dash. Focal 6.5 inch components in the back. I was actually quite surprised to see, and it's a very cool feature on these, that they had originally a tweeter mounting position in the back for the rear seat passengers as well, which is something you do not expect to see on a car like a Golf, but we're making use of those, and then it's running a Pioneer amp and a very small active Pioneer subwoofer in the boot to try and make the most of that installation. There's a lot of sound deadening mat going in, which Luke's been working on. Yeah, so looking forward to seeing all that go together, and then we'll have the new seats that the customer's given us to fit in this. It's going to be this is definitely one of those cars, as with several in here, where when it's done, I'm going to be like, yeah, I really want that car myself. And then the Mercedes, which is about ready to hand over. Nick's had it on here to do the alignment, and he's just got to do a final road test on this. But as a bit of a project recap, because it's quite a cool example of what we can essentially say yes to at the den. And originally it came in for a reupholstery, so it was full leather originally. Customer wanted to change that, wanted to go with an original OEM Mercedes cloth, which we managed to source for him on the seat centres, then extend that onto the trim panels on the door cards and dash, which were originally wood. Then on the centre console, he wanted to change from the original wood to a satin black painted finish, which we did with a clear matte lacquer, so it doesn't scratch easily. Then he decided he wanted the steering wheel upholstering in the same leather we were doing the seats in, so of course Richard said no problem there. And then a few little things. We noticed it had just come here fresh from an air ride conversion, and the controller, airlift performance controller, was just kind of on the seat on the end of its wire. And I said, it'd be cool to have that in the ashtray, and he said, yeah, that would be really cool. So we did a little work there, installed that into the ashtray, designed a 3D printed part, so now you pop the ashtray open and that comes out, has the airlift controller on there. You can reconfigure those controllers to work in either orientation, so originally portrait, but we've changed that to being landscape. And then, and this was a cool one, gear shifter, originally wood. He decided it would be really cool to have a green malachite ball as the shift knob. So he actually gave us a box with some of those gear knob balls in. Nick perilously did some diamond core drilling to drill a hole into one to bond a thread into it. And then we at Retropower designed a stick that was then machined by Andy at Concept 303 out of stainless steel, which had a little bit of a kind of, if you like, tulip flare at the top, so we could get a bit more area supporting the ball and actually bond it as well, so we weren't entirely relying on the threads. Got all that installed. Also the gear sort of shift gate surround, which was originally wood as well. Customer said, could you machine that from billet? And yes, no problem. So we designed that, drew that up, had that machined, anodized, put that in. So now it's got some really, really cool touches inside. And then while it was here, there was various mechanical bits to go through on the car as well. So some of the exhaust was starting to break down. So it's got a new OEM Mercedes middle box. We've done a modified rear with a Lorenzo tailpipe on it. We've fitted the Lorenzo wheels that he supplied. We took the cam cover off, had that blasted and powder coated. There was an issue with the airflow meter, so that's been replaced. I seem to remember there was some kind of fuel line issue on it as well, and a few other little mechanical things to go through on it. So yeah, started with our basic inspection and an instruction to do the upholstery. Ended up being a sequence of very, very cool touches, and what's turned out, and I say it way too much, is a car that I would absolutely love to drive myself. So Mercedes W124. And then the other thing that's been going on down here, which is equally as cool, is the interior that is going into what I've now called the business, after because there is the same SL500 in the same colour in the Danny Dyer film of that title. So Richard is working on the interior for that car, and it's looking absolutely sensational. So I'll hand over to Richard now to show you what he's been up to.
How's it, everybody? Good to be back. So this week it's going to be short and sweet because it's pretty much all this 500 SL. There's a completed seat. The fact that I left one intact paid off, because it was very easy to just get all the little parts and the sliders and the nuts and the springs back into place. So this is done, very happy with it. We did a small, not a repair, a clean job. So the seat was actually stuck in the rails, and it was all the grease that was packed up and dried out, and it was so stuck that it physically couldn't move. So cleaned that out with a bit of thinners and washed it out, scraped all the hard bits out. So that's sliding forwards and backwards now. So just got to put it in a car and then see if that actually works, if it wasn't something else that contributed to that as well. But that's nice. So now so I managed to sew both seat covers in the end, and as you can see, there's a seat cover. So it starts off like that, and then with a whole lot of clips. Because we changed it, I had to make a little bit of changes. So I had to, originally it wouldn't have this tie down strip here at the bottom. So what I do is I go with coated string really, and I put a couple of strings through, and I put it through the pad, and then I just button them down just to make sure that cover, because previously, with the way that they did the fluted design, was they did the tuck and roll, then the foams get stuck in, but it would be laminated with a type of material, like a calico type of material, and then they actually glued a couple of strips down, and then it just gets hog-ringed or glued right around the frame, and that's how it was kept in place. But because I've done away with that, and I don't need this massive piece of calico, I decided, okay, I'll just put some tie downs and I'll just button them through to make sure the seat will stay. So you can slide in and out of the seat as much as you want. These two lines will never move. There was some fastenings originally, so I'm happy with that. So yeah, so rest of today and tomorrow, it's hopefully today, fingers crossed, finishing off this seat. This is the driver's seat. Then I can put them in the car. Maybe you guys will see a sneak peek of it. And then it's onto the door cards. And then we are done. We've decided with this project actually that we're going to do it in stages. So we're doing the seats, put it in the car, get it all nice. Customer's going to use it for summer. And then it'll come back, because it was quite a long wait on the carpet set, which is original Mercedes carpet, and they do look good, but we just weren't going to wait that long. We want to give the customer opportunity to use his car, so very happy with that. So we don't have to rush. He gets to enjoy his car. We'll book it back in, and we'll just do it in stages. So that all worked out. So that is it from me, Jamie. I will see you guys next week.
Thank you very much, Richard. And on my final note, if you want to go in the shop on retropower.co.uk/shop, there are t-shirts, and as I mentioned at the beginning of the den walk round, the sun is coming, so get yourself a t-shirt. There's some really cool key rings in there as well. Yeah, get yourself sorted, and we'll see you next week.